It's kind of wild to think about how a single tiny spark can just explode into an inferno, one that literally erases towns from the map and completely reshapes history. So today we're going to dive into some of the deadliest wildfires the world has ever seen and figure out what they can actually teach us. All right, let's start with a scenario that feels, well, terrifyingly real. I want you to imagine this. It's January 2025. You're in Southern California, and suddenly, a series of fires just erupts everywhere. And they're being fanned by those fierce, dry Santa Ana winds. The ones locals call the devil winds. And just like that, in a matter of hours, 40,000 acres are gone. Just consumed. All those beautiful golden hills turn to black ash. And a thick, choking smoke completely blots out the sun. It's like nighttime in the middle of the day. And this forces, get this, more than 200,000 people from their homes. 200,000! They're fleeing with just whatever they can grab as the flames get closer and closer. Now, that terrifying scenario, it's not just something we made up. It's based on a pattern we've seen again and again throughout history. So in this explainer, we're going to look at a few things. First, this ever-present threat of wildfires. Then, the sparks of disaster, what actually starts them. We'll look at the sheer scale of the impact, by the numbers. And finally, the lasting scars and lessons they leave behind. Okay, so first up, an ever-present threat. It's easy to think of these massive mega fires as a really modern problem, right? But the truth is, this threat is, well, it's as old as civilization itself. Look at it this way. The technology changes, sure. But the core threat, it's exactly the same. Whether it's a simple farming mistake way back in 1871 or a failing power line today, both can end in the same exact tragic result. One single spark, and a whole community becomes a disaster zone. All right, section 2, sparks of disaster. So the big question is, what really starts these massive infernos? Well, it almost always boils down to one of two things. It's either us, human error, or it's the raw, untamable power of nature. Okay, so to really get our heads around the single deadliest wildfire in American history, we got to start with this ancient technique, slash and burn agriculture. It's a really simple way to clear land, but man, does it carry an almost unbelievable risk. And get this, believe it or not, on the very same day that the more famous Screech Chicago fire started, small embers from these farming practices got whipped up by high winds in Wisconsin. They ignited the whole surrounding forest and created something so intense. Survivors described a fire tornado that was powerful enough to literally toss railcars through the air. Just incredible. Which, of course, brings us to the Great Chicago Fire. It's one of the most famous legends in history, right? Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern? But is there actually any truth to it? Well, the cow definitely makes for a better story, but the real story is honestly just tragic. A small fire did start in a barn, but the city's totally exhausted fire department got sent to the wrong address. That one simple, crucial mistake gave the flames the head start they needed to just consume Chicago. And that is the crucial takeaway here. So many of these disasters, they begin with us. It could be a faulty hook from a utility pole, a worker making a simple mistake with a gas can, or a snapped power line. A lot of the time, our own systems are the ignition point. But, it's not always our fault. Sometimes we have nothing to do with it. The spark comes directly from the sky and with terrifying, terrifying efficiency. And what happened next was just a truly awesome and terrifying display of natural power. Thousands of individual lightning strikes started all these little fires across Idaho and Montana. And then, hurricane-force winds swept in and just merged them all into one massive, unstoppable wall of flame. All right, on to section 3, by the numbers. It's one thing to hear these stories, but it's something else entirely to actually see the data. So let's try to wrap our heads around the true scale of all this destruction. Okay, so the numbers here are really revealing. Look at Peshtigo. It had the highest death toll by a huge margin. But then you look at the Black Dragon fire in China, and the sheer scale is just on another level entirely. A staggering 18 million acres burned. That wiped out 1/6 of the entire country's timber reserves. Just gone. And the financial cost, it's just as staggering. The 2018 Camp Fire wasn't just destructive. It was the single most expensive catastrophe in the entire world that year. The liabilities hit over $16.5 billion. That's a sum so massive, it actually forced the giant utility company, PG&E, into bankruptcy. Okay, our final section, lasting scars and lessons. So, what happens after the smoke finally clears? Well, these infernos don't just leave scars on the landscape. They fundamentally change everything, our laws, our culture, and even how we remember the past. And this is a perfect example of how one single traumatic event can shape national policy for an entire century. The Big Burn of 1910 directly led to the U.S. Forest Service forming its core mission. And then decades later, it gave us Smokey the Bear, which is still one of the most successful ad campaigns in history, all from one fire. But the legacies aren't just about policy papers and ad campaigns. They are deeply, deeply personal. This account from a fire in Canada way back in 1825 just shows the random cruelty of it all. A pastor's church was miraculously spared, but his house and his entire family were gone. Stories like that, they get etched into a community's soul forever. And this story is absolutely not over. In fact, the modern legacy of fire is being written as we speak. I mean, as recently as 2021, fires in the Siberian taiga burned so uncontrollably that the smoke created what people in nearby cities were literally calling an air apocalypse. The scale of that single event was genuinely global. In fact, NASA confirmed something that had never, ever been seen before in recorded history. Smoke from those fires traveled over 1,800 miles, all the way to the North Pole. If that doesn't prove how interconnected our planet systems are, I don't know what does. So when you look at all of this history, it really leaves us with one critical question about our own future. As our world gets hotter and drier, making the conditions for these mega fires more and more common, what's the next chapter of this story going to look like? Thanks for joining me on this explainer.